Welcome to r/Reddit Revenge. This is a story of someone getting back at someone with revenge after being wronged. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story. Company had to pay for me for about a year and a half until I quit. The second story. Guy underreporting income is late paying his accountant. Accountant rats him out. The third story. I was the only one who knew some of the old systems and processes. And the first story is, horrible boss gets what he deserves. This happened not that long ago. I worked a horrible job for a horrible boss that treated all his employees badly, disrespecting their times and efforts, refusing to pay for working overtime, and even getting physical with male coworkers. He always looked to find ways to scam us into taking even a little bit of money from us, even though we worked minimum wage and he was loaded. I didn't receive proper training because they didn't have enough staff. I had a shift alone on my second day there, and he tried to punish me for any mistakes I made because I worked with money. For all my time there, I wasn't allowed any days off, and I had to work Monday through Sunday and repeat without being paid for the 10 hours on top of my 40 a week. I decide that it's time to quit, and right as I pick the date for my grand exit, the lockdown begins. We have no idea for how long, but because of the pandemic, we will be on lockdown. This would be a stupid time to quit, since during the lockdown we would still be getting paid. After 2 months of staying at home, our workplace opens up again and I get called back to work. In those 2 months, I found out I was pregnant. Now, during the pandemic, pregnant women were allowed to not work, and the government would pay for the expenses. My boss begs me to keep going to work because he needs employees until he figures it out. I accept only because I was bored. Keep in mind that me working there is illegal because he's taking money from the government to pay me, but it's still forcing me to work. I'm at work one day and I get extremely sick. I call him to ask him if I can leave, and he tells me to suck it up and this isn't his problem. And because pregnancy brain is an actual thing, I get lost, and I make a mistake that means now I have to pay for it. I call him and let him know that when I get paid I will pay for it, thinking it's no big deal, but he loses his mind on me, starts calling me names, and telling me that I need to give back the money right away. At this point I'm sick of him and this stupid job, so I tell him that the money will be given to him in about 30 minutes, and to not expect me at work tomorrow. He tells me fine, I'm fired. I go home and call a lawyer right away. I'm told that I'm 100% right, and that this if taken to court is the easiest case to win. Lawyer warns me that my boss might try to get me to sign documents saying that I quit myself. And that is what happened. He tried to get me to sign it, and I told him no, I want him to fire me. He threatened to sue me for making a mistake, and I just asked him how he was going to explain that I made that mistake, because he forced me to work pregnant during a pandemic, while lying to the government and getting money from them. He called later that day, I assume after he spoke to a lawyer, and found out that if taken to court, he will lose a huge amount of money. He asked me to come back to work because he thought I was unaware of my rights. I told him that I'm not coming to work, and they can fire me if they want to. Legally, they aren't allowed to fire me because I was pregnant. So this is how I got months of paid leave because of pandemic, and then months of maternity leave while also being paid. The company had to pay for me for about a year and a half until I quit. If he didn't treat me the way he did, I would have kept working and helping him, but he decided to go there, so I took what he loves the most, his money. Don't be a waste of a human being, and treat the people that make you your money with respect, and maybe you won't get played. Toodles! Your boss is a stupid man, because first he lost a good employee, i.e. you, and second he created his own problems by deciding to fire you. Apparently he didn't realize how good you were to him, so he didn't appreciate you. Not everyone knows that when you treat your employees right, they will put in more effort. I used to work in an office job and I had a boss like that. He didn't want to pay his employees, but he wanted everyone to obey him. I worked my A off. Sometimes I worked until the end of the day, and I was always willing to help. One time I asked my boss for a day off and he turned me down. I was angry. It was my wife's birthday and we had planned a trip to the mountains. That's when I said I was quitting and wouldn't come to work anymore. He asked me to stay. I told him my job would now be hourly pay, 5 times my previous salary, and he agreed. He had no choice, because only I knew what he needed. The second story is, you should always pay your accountant, especially if you got skeletons in your closet. My buddy is an accountant. He has his own firm. His biggest clients are small to medium-sized businesses. Well, he had a client who owned 4 different clubs and bars in 2 different cities. Client was always slow on payment, etc. I was a customer of one of the bars. They had poker game that I would play in on Thursdays. Well, one day I'm at my buddy's house, having a few beers, and he's being about non-payment from a client. I ask who. He doesn't want to say, but it's really bugging him because it's a significant chunk of change. He then says the name. We'll call him Scott. I'm like, wow, Scott isn't paying you? He then says Scott is saying business is way down, and I think that's odd. I've been going to one Scott place and every Thursday is packed. My buddy looks at me and goes, really? I go, yeah. He does this new cash discount thing, 15% off your tab if you pay cash. My buddy goes, really? I tell him about my experience at Scott's bar, and eventually the topic changes. A few weeks later, my buddy calls me up and says, you going to Scott's bar to play poker? I said, yeah. He says, can I join? I go, sure. He joins, we get a few drinks in us, lose our money at poker. My house is closer, he decides to crash there. On the way over, he breaks down his theory. He thinks Scott is vastly underreporting his revenue. The reason why he suspects Scott is offering cash discount is because cash is easier to hide. He says he's going to do a deep dive on Scott's finances. My friend tells me his plan is to go all 4 of Scott's establishments, get the prices he charges at each place, piece together how much alcohol he's buying versus how much Scott is saying his revenue equates to. He looks up how much Scott is paying in payroll, rent, bills, etc. Keep in mind he has access to all this info. And he determines that Scott is basically using his credit card receipts, plus a little bit of cash to cover his cost of business, to include rent, payroll, insurance, liquor, food, etc. However, based upon the amount of products he's selling, he's suspecting Scott is underreporting his total income by about 35 to 40%. He goes back into Scott's books even more. And he figures in the last year, Scott has been underreporting his sales by 35 to 40%. But he's also been underreporting his sales by at least 20 to 25% for years on end. Simply put, there's no way Scott is going through as much product and as much alcohol as he's purchasing and having the same revenue numbers that he's claiming. He's underreporting his sales to his accountant, which means he's also underreporting his earnings to the IRS. By this point, Scott owes my friend thousands of dollars that he hasn't paid. He said his total amount owed could buy a brand new motorcycle. He never gave me an exact number. My friend decides F getting repayment from Scott. Let's get repayment from the IRS through the whistleblower program. He's estimated Scott's underreported his revenue by millions of dollars over the course of years. The whistleblower fees he'd earned from the IRS far outweighs the amount Scott owes him. The IRS will pay between 15 to 30% of what they collect. So with the assistance of a lawyer, my friend gathers all the evidence he has Scott's underreporting to the IRS and files a whistleblower report with the IRS. During this time, my friend fires Scott as a client for non-payment. Now this part gets boring because there's a lot of legal wrangling and back and forth. This went back and forth. However, eventually the IRS comes down on Scott, and they come down hard. It's estimated that Scott underreported his income to the IRS by about $4.5 million. Now, my friend never told me how much the IRS was able to recoup, but Scott's businesses are no longer his businesses, and $4.5 million would put the whistleblower award at $675K to $1.3 million. Keep in mind it's based on what the IRS collects, not the amount that's reported. I've asked my friend how much he got in the end, and he simply says, I no longer have a mortgage, and it would have been much cheaper for Scott to just pay me. Edit. I was told the total max was around $600K to $1.3 million. Remember, there would be penalties and stuff. I wasn't involved in any of the numbers, just a casual observer. Also, it seemed like Scott was showing a business that barely turned a profit, when in reality it was quite profitable. To hell with rich people who think they're too good to pay taxes. We need to bring back banishment as punishment for anyone who thinks they shouldn't contribute to the general welfare of society. Glad the IRS got his A. The IRS has one of the friendliest and most informative websites. Very helpful. Of course they want your money and any money owed to them, so they make it as easy as possible for the average person to either pay their taxes or get exposed. Personally, I wish the IRS would spend most of its auditing resources on the really big guys, doing only random, very random audits on smaller people, just to keep as many honest people as possible. But that's probably why the whistleblower award is bliss. I used to work in nightclubs and then in a music magazine, where clubs were advertised and could confirm that bar and club owners are often the cheapest and/or darkest crooks on the planet. I grew up among business professors, and the fastest way to really screw up and ruin your life was to cheat the IRS. The last story is, boss tried to screw me over. I start a dumpster fire. This happened almost 5 years ago. I was working in an organization that was super toxic, so much so that we were a revolving door. Most employees stayed only a few months. To counter this, our management put 3 months' notice into everyone's contract, including existing employees. It's not strictly illegal where this happened, but very unusual. I believe the idea was to make it harder for employees to find a job outside, as employers didn't usually want to wait for 3 months. However, this didn't work, as people simply quit and waited for a month or two before starting their job hunt. I was there almost 4 years. I needed the money, so I put up with whatever abusive SH was thrown at me. My boss was a guy we'll call Vince, not actual name. Now, Vince was not particularly good, but he sometimes respected the fact that I was the most tenured grunt in the organization. Enter Rajesh, not actual name. Rajesh was brought in from outside for strategically improving our division. This was quite strange given our division generated most profits. Within months, Rajesh made the environment even more toxic. He pulled Vince's team under him and got Vince fired, and he actively encouraged us grunts to spy on each other. Rajesh also had it out for me from day one. Till date, I don't know why. He started making my life more harder than the others. This culminated in him taking me aside and telling me that I was not pulling my weight. Now, at this point, I was doing quite well in the organization, and I was doing a lot of additional work, since only I knew certain systems and processes. See high attrition above, so I was quite angry. I started looking out. I still wasn't brave enough to quit and start looking. Fortunately, I was able to find a job that was willing to wait the 3 months. So it was my turn to take Rajesh aside and tell him I quit. Boy, Rajesh was peeved. He went from denial, you can't quit, to negotiation. What if I give you a raise at the end of the year? To acceptance. Thus, I was serving my notice and working away like an honest bee. My usual work and the additional work. At this point, I was called by HR and told that Rajesh wanted me gone. The insane part was that they wanted me to pay the company for the 2.5 months shortfall in notice. I obviously refused, then went back and checked the contract. Turns out a notice of less than 3 months could only happen through mutual consent, and the initiating party, company if they wanted me gone sooner, or me if I wanted to leave earlier, had to compensate the other party for the shortfall. The next day, I stopped doing anything at all. I logged in and logged out my hours and did Jack SH. Not my work, definitely not the additional responsibilities. Soon there was a complete meltdown all around. Rajesh would pull me into meetings and scream and try to bully me, and I would say nothing but smirk. Then they tried to have someone else learn from me, so that they could do what I did. Remember I said earlier how I was the only one who knew some of the old systems and processes? Well, now I claimed I really didn't remember any of them, so obviously there could be no handover. Soon my workplace turned into a dumpster fire. The HR/Rajesh smartened up and offered to buy out my notice if I cooperated and helped transition my work. I refused. Then to twist the knife further, I started having meetings with fellow grunts. Remember, everyone was always a newbie, and encouraging them to leave as well. HR tried to get me to leave twice more, but I ended up serving the full 3 months. Remember the mutual consent part? I can't understand how they changed the contracts of people who already worked there. A contract is an agreement between two entities, and no one can unilaterally change it. I also never understand these mandatory notice periods. Who provides them? What happens if you say F you and leave? Do they in turn give you 3 months notice? I've walked into my boss's office, thrown my keys, badge, and company property on the desk, then salute them with one finger and leave stage left. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support the channel.